Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with The Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by one unit dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
You know, there are days when I just sit here and regret that I ignored my mother's advice to join the Merchant Marine. But in as much as I didn't, I'm left to contemplate the state of the world, and it just seems to be getting worse by the day. Here to help me dissect all of this are my co-hosts in the Tan Talk studio, both attorneys, Gary Gibbons, along with former Circuit Judge Kevin Carey. And in the second hour of our show, we're going to look at some excerpts from John Meacham's new book called American Struggle, and just how much wealth do the world's billionaires have. We'll look at that and more today here on The Voice of Reason. Well, Gary, let's start with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and the Department of Injustice.
Well, if you'll recall, back in January, right after Renee Good was shot and killed, Tim Walz and the folks in Minnesota were up in arms about how ICE had swept in there to do their raids, and Operation Metro. Anyway, what they did is they served subpoenas on the people in Minnesota, the governor, and they asked them for turning over all kinds of records, and it was it's worked its way through the courts, and finally this week the judge said that he quashed all of the subpoenas, meaning he just said these things are dead on arrival. You're not going to have to comply with them. And he said that the evidence was overwhelming, that the Trump administration had, without success, just weaponized these subpoenas, trying to get information that had no basis on any kind of crime that had occurred. And so he said it was clear that they had threatened and to punish the local officials, and that they were doing it solely for weaponization. They were going after anybody that had talked about having a sanctuary city in their state, where people could go and not where the local government would not assist the feds to have people deported. And the judge said it's really a shame that this is what's happened with our Department of Justice. They're using it improperly. And he said, I'm not going to have any part of this. And this was a George W. Bush appointee, to the federal bench.
Well, this was once again a loss. We've talked many times where the only piece of the puzzle that's pushed back has been the federal district judges, the local level. Supreme Court, Ed and Gary, is not done their job. The appellate courts, Court of Appeals have not. But this is one more example of Trump losing. If you kept track of all the cases involving Trump, he has lost vast majority of them. And this is one more example of that.
The judge noted that the connection between the requested information and any actual criminal violation, that is, was extremely weak to non-existent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he determined that the dominant purpose of the grand jury process was to harass, retaliate, and force Minnesota Democrats to enforce federal civil immigration laws, which the federal government cannot directly require states to do. But it does demonstrate, doesn't it, that you cannot indict a ham sandwich without at least a shred of evidence. We've seen this multiple times now in the Trump administration's weaponization of the Injustice Department.
Well, that's a fair point, Ed. I think you've seen in the other cases we've had with these crazy mortgage, purported mortgage fraud cases to try to drum up these issues against the Attorney General Letitia James, Comey, where the grand juries, which again, a reminder of viewers and listeners, there's no defense counsel, there's no judge, so that's why they indicted a ham sandwich. And even when you've got nothing but the prosecutor, they can't get it done through the grand jury.
Well, Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee are launching an investigation into FBI Director Kash Patel's alleged misuse of FBI funds, which again goes to weaponizing the FBI or turning it into an agency of the administration, which it is not supposed to be. It's Jamie Raskin that's behind all of this, who is the highest-ranking Democrat on the committee. And he says they've received information that Patel had directed more than $1 million in bonuses to agents close to himself. Raskin alleges that Patel directed repeated $8,000 bonuses per 2-week pay period to a select inner circle of agents dubbed the Paycheck Squad on the director's advisory team. And the claims are that these bonuses were used either as corrupt compensation for pursuing political enemies and conducting internal polygraphs on dissenting staff, or as hush money to ensure silence regarding Patel's alleged misconduct and inebriation while on the job.
It's ironic, Ed, that Trump, who's a teetotaler, has 2 alcoholics in his cabinet, Kash Patel and Pete Hegseth, both alcoholics. And Patel, by the way, all these noted singers have canceled because they don't want to be there tied with his 250th MAGA celebration. So the big headliner, did you know, is Kash Patel's 27-year-old girlfriend?
Oh, geez.
Did you hear that on the news?
I didn't hear that.
So you don't have any, there's no big stars, but Kash Patel's girlfriend of the moment will be the headliner. But I'm surprised Patel is still in the cabinet. We tend to have a betting who's next. Bondi was gone. Our friend from Hawaii gone, and I think Patel is next.
Gabbard, you're talking
Gabbard
about,
is
right?
gone. Yeah. I know that she has a husband with cancer, but beyond that, I think she was gone either way when she was trying to kiss Trump's ass by going down to Georgia, for that whole charade with stealing the ballots. Anyway, but on Patel, he's just a train wreck. He is corrupt beyond the fact he's a drug. He's an alcoholic. He's unqualified, never was qualified for that position as head of the FBI. He's a joke. But again, that's because Trump doesn't want anyone competent in that room to challenge him, even though he's a corrupting and very much incompetent president. But anything you would tell me about Patel, I would believe.
Well, we know he's spending millions on transportation with the FBI jets for personal use, which led to the resignation of an FBI director back, wasn't it in the 90s or during the Clinton administration? Guy took the jet to see his daughter in Denver, and when that was exposed, he resigned. This guy does it routinely because he is, after all, a member of the party of fiscal responsibility. So they're wasting millions, no different from what they're doing with the reflecting pool. That started out at 1.8 million. Now it's up to 16 million. And you wouldn't want to stick your toe in it, mainly because if you did, you'd get arrested, right?
And
The
Trump,
free state of America, nothing says it, better than, cordoning off the reflecting pond and arresting people. They have that area under 24-hour surveillance. There are videos. And so Trump claims that there's been vandalism. Well, show me the video that shows anybody did this, and they don't have it. Again, there's never any evidence. It's all allegations, no evidence.
Well, once again, just like the whole decision to go into Iran was done without any a forethought. This is, aforementioned the problems with having no idea about that they would cut off the Strait of Hormuz. This silly kind of reflection pond issue, they didn't quite even understand. He talked about how you did it was going to create this algae problem. I mean, we're spending all this money and time talking about some stupid reflecting pond, and then he's talking about that there's been this, all these people where they are committing crimes. He's going to arrest them all. But for the fact it's such a waste of time and money, and we're not dealing with any real issues, which primarily in this country right now is affordability, access to housing, which I know we're going to talk about housing in a few minutes with this bipartisan bill that, Trump, penalized by saying, I'm not going to sign this bipartisan bill. But yeah, this reflecting pool issue is just, again, a diversion. It's the amount of money he's spending. You used the term, I think last week, man-child to refer to Trump. I think that's a very, very accurate, and this is an example of that, focused on something like this.
The other thing they did was they filled it up with the tap water from Washington, D.C., and it has extra phosphorus in it because they've been using that in the drinking water there to keep the old lead pipes in Washington from disintegrating more quickly. And so phosphorus is, it helps algae blooms. And so, yeah, here you are, just when you don't have any scientists in the government, sometimes things just fall apart.
Yeah, and then he at first came out and said, well, I've picked the pool contractor who was the felon, right? Then when everything turned into a disaster, he said, I had nothing to do with selecting the contractor. So it's always the same thing. This guy is the textbook phony who says when anything goes right, I take the credit. When anything goes wrong, blame somewhere else, which is why I think, and we'll probably get to it later in the program, why he has Vance negotiating with Iran, because that's more likely than not to turn into a disaster. And now he can pass the buck on to him.
Well, this no bid contract to me is scandalous. He gives these contracts to his buddies, his cronies. I got to think there's some regulations that prohibit all these ongoing no bid contracts that are handed out, and these numbers are just incredible, millions of dollars.
Well, again, it's always an emergency. It's just like Ron DeSantis. They create a quote unquote emergency, and then they use that to sidestep the bidding requirements, the things that we've put in law for a reason, because we want people that will actually know what they're doing instead of Trump's pool contractor felon buddy.
That was the playbook that Steve Miller, who's again corrupt in the White House and mean-spirited, just asshole, frankly, Miller, guy that could never get a date in high school. I'm mad at the world. So this playbook became everything's an emergency. So gosh, we can now create all these executive orders, many of them which have already been thrown out by federal judges, and the rest of them will be gone the first day there's a Democrat in the White House. So Miller, I'm glad you thought that was a long-term solution, which it wasn't. And just like you said, Gary, DeSantis, who's a poodle, who criticized, ran against Trump, is now his poodle, just like Mike Johnson's his poodle in the House of Representatives as Speaker. But there were no emergencies in any of these situations. We talked about alligator Alcatraz. What a train wreck that has become financially. And you think Republicans would care about financial issues, Ed? The money we've wasted with this corruption at both the federal and state level is mind-boggling.
The new jet, the new Air Force One, and what that's going to cost us. Then the guy's just going to take it with him when he leaves? What's that all about? Without a shred of evidence, I am compelled to believe that the reason that price jumped by another $10 million, I'm talking about the pool, he could have gone to that contractor, who we know is a felon, and said to him, look, I'm going to kick another 10 million into this job. I'll take 9, you take 1. You're the bag man. And why wouldn't he say, sure, that's a free million balloons for me? Why else did it happen?
Nothing you would tell me about anything that Trump or these minions do would ever surprise me anymore. Nothing. There's no more bottom that I would say, I can't believe that, Ed.
So now he's telling us that somebody climbed in that pool with a box cutter and cut a 350-foot slit down the middle of it. This is what he said, literally. I'm quoting Trump. I saw it. They cut it. They cut it very violently. The same thing with the floor. They cut it, And then they lifted it, they pulled it, and that's what it is, unquote. Now, curiously, when the project was being renovated, here's what Trump claimed about the durability of the liner being installed.
This will last for at least 50 years, and you'll never have a leak. It's very strong. You couldn't, if you had a knife, I don't want to give anybody ideas. If you had a knife, you can't even cut it.
Unbelievable.
You can cut it, you can't cut it. What is it,
Again, we're losing hospitals, nursing homes, Medicaid's been cut, Medicare's being cut, people can't afford rent. And this is what this clown is focusing on. It's like the kid who doesn't want to study for his exams because he knows he's not prepared. So he starts looking out the window and chasing flies. We spend all this time, Ed, on these ridiculous issues. So not only you're not addressing the issues, you're spending all this money. And then he just talks about these things that aren't even true. Does anybody in MAGA care that this guy's in a fantasy world?
I don't know. It's the way he addressed Social Security. He said, it's not a problem anymore. We discovered all of the waste and fraud, cleaned it all up. The system's solvent. That means he doesn't have a clue what's going on with that.
There's now a MAGA support group, because we've said for months or years that MAGA is a cult. It's not just a politics. And there literally now are support groups to assist people, just like if you were going to AA, assist you get out of this cult, just like you would back in Jim Jones, because MAGA people are understanding the realities of these problems.
And it was the same thing with the housing issue. He says housing, there's nothing to it. Lower the interest rates and we'll have housing for everybody. Well, we've already got inflation up to 4.2%. Lowering the interest rates to where he would set them would probably jack it up over 6%, while he's telling us he had the highest interest rate in history when he took office. It was 3%. The highest interest rate was probably, I think, around 24% right after the First World War, about 100 years ago. When we went into the roaring 20s, it was really high. And of course, it got up to 9% in the early days of the previous administration because he had so thoroughly bungled the coronavirus response. And we had the whole supply line being backlogged. And that's what triggered that inflation that carried over into the Biden administration.
You mentioned housing. I don't want to get ahead, but there was a bipartisan housing bill that was both sides had bought into it. Trump was intending and did have a nice luncheon we'll talk about in a few minutes in terms of became a yelling match. But but all the Senate Republicans at that lunch were expecting that to be a signing ceremony for this bipartisan housing bill. And one of the provisions, by the way, I was listening on the way driving down from Gainesville this morning. Warnock from Georgia was saying one of the key issues they'd agreed upon was, for example, rents have become a problem because you've got these corporate buyers of these residential homes who are jacking up the rents. And so there was a lot in this housing bill on a bipartisan level that was going to be a good thing. And the Republicans needed something to campaign on. So they expected there to be this signing ceremony at this Senate luncheon yesterday. Trump, as he always does, last week he canceled the Clayton, the director of national intelligence because he was so focused on this SAVE Act, which is nothing more than a voter suppression act. He comes in and says, "Well, I'm not going to sign any housing bill because you've told me we're not going to get the SAVE Act, which never has had a chance to pass." They couldn't get 50 senators right now, Republicans, let alone the 60 they need to avoid the filibuster. So he's so focused on this voter suppression federal act, which is never going to get passed. He's willing to say two things. I don't give a damn about housing, back to your point, Ed. Or two, I don't give a damn about you getting reelected, because these Republicans are begging for something to go to their constituents with before the election in November. So it's killing these Republicans. Became a shouting match between Cassidy and Trump. Yet literally shouting match between Trump and Cassidy yesterday. But back, Thune, who's the president, majority leader for the Republicans, it's killing him because none of this is helping getting these folks reelected in November. But Trump does not give a damn about that.
But it's outright extortion, isn't it? And can't the Congress override his veto? Because I presume that since he hasn't signed it, after a certain amount of time, then it's presumed that he vetoed it. right? And then they can go in and vote to override the veto, which is what happened with the Epstein Files deal. When he realized everybody was voting for it, he had to switch and vote and sign it because he knew they'd override his veto.
Yeah, in fact, they should have the votes to override it because it was like an 80% approval of this thing. You had people like Elizabeth Warren, on the same page with the most right-wing MAGA people, because this is a real problem that people are talking about all over the country. And you said it well, the Republicans were dying for something that they could talk about to say, hey, we did something, because they haven't passed anything all year.
Yeah. Now, these are the actual numbers.
This is
Kevin,
what,
let me
go ahead.
Hold your thought just a second.
Sure.
The House voted 358 to 32. And that followed the Senate vote on Monday, which was 85 to 5.
Wow. Yeah.
And this
so
was
talk about a
bipartisan.
landslide. Yeah, it has to be to get those numbers.
Well, you had Elizabeth Warren, who was the ranking Democrat, and I forget who chaired it, but who chairs that committee. But there were two people that you would never think would agree on anything. But they're begging for that. But what bugged Trump this week, and again, it's you're dealing with the devil here. Every day you got to try and mollify this son of a gun. And what pissed him off was the vote on the War Powers Act, where they finally got a majority of the Congress on both sides to hold Trump accountable. Now wasn't binding, but that's what pissed him off, and that's what triggered him saying, "I'm not going to sign this housing bill." He threw in the SAVE Act part of it, which I do believe was blackmail to some degree. But he gets into a shouting match with Cassidy. Literally, they're yelling at each other at the Senate meeting. What I've been told, just when I read that doesn't happen. These luncheons are not meant. One of the senators said there's only one other time that's happened. But then what happened after that, though, was Cassidy backed down, and I think Rand Paul also backed down, because it was Paul, Cassidy, and then there was two other usual suspects, Murkowski from Alaska and Susan Collins from Maine. But so Trump was now bragging last night that he got Cassidy and Paul to back down. Again, this was not binding, but for Trump, it's all about winning, and it's all personal. It's not about the public good with him. He doesn't give a damn about these Republicans. And again, I have no sympathy for them, because they've let this go on. They've enabled this horrible president for 2 years or 6 years. So I have very little sympathy. But as we both agree, I think, Gary, this was something that these Republicans could say, hey, we agree that housing is a major problem.
Yeah. Well, that goes. Okay, go ahead. Gary.
The other thing is he poo-pooed the whole, war resolution anyway, saying, oh, well, we're not at war. We haven't been at war since April 7th when we declared the ceasefire. Does anybody think that we're not still at war with all of our troops over there? And every other day they're firing missiles at other countries, and, as part of this on again, off again negotiation. The real problem is that this war is illegal, and has been illegal from the beginning, because he didn't get any authorization from Congress to do it. And there is a 60-day window that they have to go back and get approval from Congress, so that it wouldn't tie the president's hands in a actual emergency where you needed to use military force to protect the country. But after that, you have to go get buy-in from Congress, and he's never done that. And so, everybody just sort of swept that under the rug, like, well, here's another law that we're just ignoring, and nobody ever complies with anything under this administration.
Well, when your narcissistic sociopath is Trump, this was the first time that vote Monday that there's been a rebuke to the president like that. There have been many times where the president, other than Trump, although he's been the worst, has ignored the requirement. As you've met, that you just went through, Gary, but this is the first time there was a vote rebuking a president like this, and that's what just drove him crazy, given the narcissist he is. It's all personal with him, And I guess he feels good after this shouting match with Cassidy. It's embarrassing. He's got a serious problem getting these Republicans reelected in November, and I guess maybe he doesn't care. As John Cornyn said, and I said this last week, he's made very clear, and Cornyn's now become he's very much more vocal now that he's no longer going to be in the Senate, that these next 2 years will be the worst 2 years of Trump's life. And I don't believe Trump is going to die in office, but I do think we can make his life miserable, just like Cornyn, who's a mainstream Republican. It will be a very hard 2 years for Trump.
Well, I'll believe it when I see it. So far, Cassidy, how long did he stand up against Trump? 15 minutes maybe, and then after that he rolled over.
Well,
like
that's ironic because, and I was surprised by that because I heard the interview. They asked him questions about what happened after that Senate luncheon yesterday when he was yelling back and forth with Trump, and Trump started the yelling, by the way. But I didn't realize from that until I heard later that he had changed his vote, because he seemed like from that interview he was sticking to his guns, and he made the comment, "I'm not going to be bullied." And I would say bullied anymore, because you've allowed this bully, just as Tillis from North Carolina, Cornyn from Texas, and Cassidy from Louisiana have all enabled this horrible president to continue. But I don't know what caused him to change his mind after he engaged in that yelling. Apparently, he and Trump probably kissed and made up at some point. But I was surprised to hear that.
Well, the White House dismissed the Senate vote on the resolution. They said it has no significance, and they blamed the measure's adoption on Republican absences, because Moscow Mitch and Dave McCormick, who had previously voted against advancing war powers resolutions, were not there. They were absent. But the official from the White House said this, quote, "Concurrent resolutions do not go to the president and have no force of law," unquote. So they're essentially saying, we don't care what Congress does.
Yeah.
This guy's a dictator.
Well, but I can tell you, they say that, but I'm telling you what happened was it pissed the hell out of Trump. And that's why he canceled again, it was agreed upon scheduled bill signing on this housing bill that was going to occur at this lunch yesterday. That's exactly what Thune, as Senate president,
it was
what
in
they expected.
statutory hall. They set up a podium and everything, a signing. They wanted this in a bad way. The Republican leadership did, because they have, like I said before, they have nothing that they can point to that they've done this year. Why should we reelect them? They don't do anything.
Well, you talk about, Gary, you provided a very good comparison of how what this letter of understanding, which, as we talked about, Ed, last week, is not even an agreement, how much worse it is than what we had in place under Obama. And it's all about, the personal. Someone said, Obama lives rent-free in Trump's head. And I love that saying, because they asked Obama about that. But nothing about this is a positive thing. Trump can try and sugarcoat it in any way he can. But again, this is a midterm election. These Republicans are about to get railroaded. And comment I heard this morning too, I want to convey to you. Trump and this administration isn't focused on voters. They're focused on votes and how they want to get all these voting rolls from these various states. They want to control the state voting, which by Constitution is improper. Elections are state by state, and he wants to federalize these elections. But he's trying to find a way to suppress these votes because he knows otherwise there's a serious problem in November.
One last thing before we go to break. You heard that the big 8647 was burned into the grass on the mall last week. It's become increasingly visible despite efforts by the Park Service to cover up the area. I think that's kind of public sentiment more and more. Trump's poll numbers now seem to be bouncing back by about 1 point from 37 to 38%. 25% of Americans think that America won the war against Iran, but I think it was 22% think that we lost it. And then the rest are sort of indifferent. They don't really know what happened with it. And yet it really isn't over by any means, is it? It
No.
just really isn't.
And Trump again just doesn't tell the truth. We talked last week about the $300 billion. I think I said million when I missed. It's incredible. It could be up to $500 billion. And Trump, in a straight face, tells reporters, "We're not on the hook for that. That's not true at all." I know that they're looking to other countries to pony up that money, but ultimately this understanding says if that doesn't happen, it's basically like a guarantee. So he says these things that just aren't true. But the two things I think that can come out of this that are just uncontested. One is before this Iranian war of choice, there was never any issue about the Strait of Hormuz, and now that has become a huge weapon that Iran has emboldened them. They've taken a shot, and secondarily, the amount of money that we're now guaranteeing to reconstruct, which is talking about $300 billion, that was nowhere near the numbers that we talked about under the agreement that Obama had.
Yeah, John Kerry was on last night speaking about his first comments since seeing the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, and he talked about that $1.8 billion that had been released as part of the Obama deal with Iran, and he said it really wasn't part of the negotiation, that it wasn't a trigger that once we pay that money, then X, Y, and Z will happen. He said what happened was years before we had agreed to sell the Shah a bunch of weapons. And then when the Shah fell and the Ayatollah took over, we never delivered those weapons to them. And so Iran sued the United States saying we never got what we paid for. And there was a court case that the judge said, "You're right, you owe the U.S. owes the money back." And it was accruing interest as a judgment. And he said, we did this because we were on the hook for it. And it was U.S. dollars now that were being added to this in terms of interest. So we paid that 1.8 to make that obligation go away.
Mm-hmm.
So far cry from what, they've spun it to say, well, this was, why'd you give them money? We never gave them any money that like the $300 billion that they want to give now. That's our taxpayer dollars.
I know we need to go to break, but I listened to this morning to that John Kerry interview, and the 3 points that I noted from that Kerry made. And Kerry was Secretary of State. We all know he ran for president in 2004 and was senator, wonderful Secretary of State under Obama. But 3 points he made that struck me. One was, until now, had never been a weaponization of the Strait of Hormuz. That this poor judgment by Trump has allowed the weaponization of the Strait of Hormuz, where countries are now looking to have to go to other areas. Secondly, he's emboldened Iran by this continued focus on fossil fuel. All that does is provide more opportunities for Iran to have leverage and get richer. And third, he talked about this asymmetrical warfare. For Iran doesn't have to go toe-to-toe with us. They've been able to use these very efficient, very low-cost drones, and they're emboldened, Ed and Gary. This has done nothing but make Iran look stronger in the world community and make us look weaker.
Well, it's 38 minutes past the hour. It's the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network with me, Ed Golly. My co-hosts are Kevin Carey and Gary Gibbons. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to look into some of the issues that Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is going to be dealing with when he sits on the Senate confirmation hot seat. That, along with more of the issues that conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Well, Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show had his man on the street interview a Trump voter.
Check out this interview we did with the Trump supporter right before he began his second term. Look at this.
Sir, you voted for President Trump. What are you hoping to see from a second Trump administration?
Well, I'm just trying to provide for my family, so it's pretty simple. I hope he starts an unnecessary war with Iran that costs the U.S. $90 billion, raises gas prices and inflation, and ends with him giving 20 times more money to Iran than Barack Obama. But my pie in the sky dream would be that literally the only tangible result of the war is opening a waterway that I've never given a thought to in my life, ideally one that's already open. But that's probably asking too much.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That guy gotta be feeling pretty good, right? That's amazing. Man.
All right, it's time for Poll Watch, where we find that 63% of Americans disapprove of how Trump is handling the economy. 29% approve, and just 14% say the economy is getting better. So much for the golden age we were promised, right? 35% approve of Trump's job performance. I see numbers as high as 38, but let's face it, he's probably not likely to hit 40 again. And what I hear commentators saying is that when we look back on previous presidents, baby Bush had really high numbers until he got into Iraq. And same thing with Biden. He was doing well until the Afghanistan disaster of the pullout, and then neither of them ever recovered and got above water with that. So the very same thing could happen now.
And there is no way
Iran disaster.
There is no way Trump ever gets to 40. It's going to get lower. I'm surprised when you tell me it's 38. Because I've seen polls even lower than that. There's no way he
35. But it depends on who takes the poll. And
the problem Trump is, you mentioned baby Bush. He seems to have thought that this Iran war would go back to, Bush was very popular after the 9/11, but you've got a very unpopular war, and you've got a very unpopular president, and you've got a horrible economy, and we haven't had, Epstein. Got to mention Epstein a few times every show. We haven't talked about Epstein. There are all these ingredients to a problem, but the main dynamic I would emphasize to our viewers and our listeners here, and is what we've talked about. We've now got these folks that need to get reelected that are about to get hammered, and we haven't talked enough about this luncheon yesterday. There's a huge stress point between the Thune and Trump and these particular senators. Again, I think Mike Johnson, who I'm going to call him Poodle Johnson the rest of the year, will do anything. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't care that he's about to lose the speakership in about 5 months. He was joking around about what happened in New York. I don't know whether we're going to have time yet to talk about the New York primaries, where he lost a very good representative in Dan Goldman in New York. But Johnson's gloating about it. None of that would happen in New York had anything to do with suggesting what's happening with MAGA and the Republicans is going well. That was solely an issue between Democrats. So, what Democrat do you want to have win in November? But there's a huge stress point right now, and it's going to be getting worse between now and November. It's just going to ramp up. And as we've talked about, Ed, they were begging Trump you got to give me something. And that was that housing bill. And Trump said, I don't give a flying F. He was pissed off about that war resolution, some obsession with this SAVE Act. God knows why, because Thune has told him again and again, he can never get that passed. And he doesn't. Trump does not care.
Agreed. Now, let's get on to Mr. Blanche, because if you're wondering why the Republicans are working so hard to keep you from voting in November, the answer slipped out of Todd Blanche's mouth this spring, standing on the stage at the Conservative Political Action Conference outside Dallas. The man who, as we all know, had been Trump's personal lawyer and criminal defense lawyer and now runs the Injustice Department as acting attorney general, said this to the crowd, and this is a direct quote: "Everybody's afraid that the next administration, if we don't win, we're going to all be investigated and indicted," unquote. And he meant it as a rallying cry. But what he actually delivered was a confession. You don't spend your evenings bracing for an indictment unless some quiet part of you already knows what you've done. A reckoning is coming for the people breaking the law for this president, and they can feel it. And now the White House is even discussing completely blowing up the Constitution and the right of habeas corpus. Here's what the New York Times said, quote, suspending habeas corpus was one of two radical ideas Mr. Miller had been pushing that alarmed Mr. Scharf. The other was invoking the Insurrection Act to deploy the military to enforce the law on American streets as protests grew against deportation sweeps. So Blanche in particular has every reason to be worried because he knows who Trump really is and what he's capable of. Remember, he's the lawyer who defended Trump in the hush money trial that ended in 34 felony conviction. And he's also the guy who's now hiding 3 million Epstein documents and cut the cushy puppy-filled deal with Ghislaine Maxwell for keeping her mouth shut. Now let's listen as former DOJ, that's the Department of Justice pardon attorney Liz Oyer exposes the corruption of acting Attorney General Todd Blanche in his preferential treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell.
Hey, everybody. I just spent the last 3 days deep down a rabbit hole of rules and regulations for federal prisons. Why? Because I wanted to show you all the rules that have been broken to protect Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's partner in crime. And I wanted to show you all the lies that have been told about it by Todd Blanche. Blanche could become our next Attorney General within weeks, so I consider this a matter of the utmost importance. I really couldn't even sleep until I finished this project. It's finally done, and it's up on my Substack with all the receipts. There is absolutely no question that Blanche cut a corrupt deal with Maxwell to protect Donald Trump. He sold out Epstein's victims, and he lied to cover it up. He did all of this by abusing his powers as Deputy Attorney General. He's still doing it as Acting Attorney General, and now he wants the Senate to confirm him to lead the Justice Department on a permanent basis. I know quite a bit about how the prison system works for regular people from my 10 years working as a federal public defender and my work as DOJ pardon attorney. Maxwell is getting special privileges that are not available to anyone else. For example, she is the only known sex offender from over 20,000 currently in federal prison who is serving her sentence in a minimum security camp. It is actually illegal to give preferential treatment to wealthy and well-connected prisoners under federal law. People like me who have a legal background have a duty to step up and call BS on the lies that are coming out of this administration. I consider it my moral and ethical duty, but I need your help spreading the word. I want to ask you to read my Substack post and then send it to your senators. They are going to vote on Blanche's nomination possibly as soon as next month. They need to have all the facts, and they need to ask Blanche about the facts at his confirmation hearing. You can find the post by going to lawyeroyer.com, or you can find it on Substack. I'll also share the link in my bio.
There's no question what happened with sending Maxwell to the Bryan, Texas country club was illegal. She's the only sex offender there. The rules prevent sex offenders from going there. So it's just illegal. I mean, if you don't care about what the law is, then I think we'll talk a little later about the fact that now he wants the Attorney General to have complete control of where a prisoner goes, which is completely unprecedented. But the hearing coming up for Blanche, he's going to get roasted. I don't know why he's confident about that.
Yeah. Wouldn't you think he'd be planning to resign just like, what was his name from the Panhandle that was going to be the...
Matt Gaetz.
Yeah. On the eve of being interrogated.
Yeah.
He just jumped ship.
Yeah.
He's like there was you remember the OJ trial? There was all the lawyers, they tore up this guy Fung or something who was the lab
Furman?
guy. Well, no,
Oh,
there was a guy.
okay.
There was a guy.
Yeah.
There was Mark Furman. There's a guy. But the point is, these lawyers were salivating. These Senate Democrats on that Judiciary Committee, they're emboldened right now. They smell blood in the water. You can see it and hear it in the comments made by these Democrats. They smell victory, certainly in the House in November. And I think, as we've talked about on the show now, because of the bungling by this administration and corruption, a very good chance of the Senate. And they smell the blood in the water. They see it. They're going after him big time in August.
they asked the warden of that prison, why she was there, and he said, "I have no idea." He knows enough not to open his mouth because he'll be fired if he says anything negative. But even the warden knows that this is not a proper thing for to have her in his prison, but they don't. Everybody looks the other way. It's so shameful.
It's shameful. It's also in a democracy, Gary and Ed, where rules matter. And when you as you mentioned, this head of the prison, it's wrong. There are guidelines that say you can't have sex offenders at this country club where she's got a dog and yoga classes. If you've seen this, and I saw this last night, if you see this prison, it doesn't look like a prison.
No, it looks like a community college.
It does.
Campus.
It does. And I've seen, my father his last tour of duty was at Eglin Air Force Base, where there's a federal prison. So I've seen these federal prisons can often look like they're not, state penitentiaries. But this place looks, you said it well, Gary, like a community college, like a hotel.
Saw a picture of her this week walking with an umbrella outside. That she could be anywhere. That she's not incarcerated.
We talked about this. Started out with Blanche. The only reason, and these MAGA people, they can be in fantasy worlds all their wants, but they're being ignorant. The only reason he went down to Tallahassee after she was already convicted was to say, "What do we need to do to shut you up?" And she said, "You need to at least send me to the cushiest. If you're not going to pardon me, which I think at some point may happen, I want you to send me to the cushiest prison you can." And that's what happened. It was a quid pro quo. That was the only reason Blanche went down there. He made some stupid comment a few weeks ago, and I mentioned this last week. "Oh, I want her to give her the opportunity to have her say." She was a convicted felon, and she could have testified at her trial, which she decided not to exercise her right. She's convicted. Does he think they think we're just all idiots? We're not going to accept this crap. The only reason he went down there was to cut a deal to get her to shut up so she would not implicate Trump. Is there anything else we need to say about that? I don't think so.
Well, now you remember that the Supreme Court issued the immunity ruling that shields the president's official acts. But here's the thing about that. It doesn't shield anybody beneath him. So the agents and the contractors and the lawyers who signed the unlawful papers, all of them remain fully exposed. And a future attorney general can act on that. So Trump understands this perfectly, and that's why he told House Republicans that they must win the midterms, because otherwise, and I'm quoting him, "they'll find a reason to impeach me," unquote. And that's why his people muse about ICE at the polls and write rules to choke off the mail. It's why Stephen Miller is reportedly pushing to suspend habeas corpus. And it's why Trump promised to, quote, "pardon everyone who's come within 200 feet of the Oval Office." Let's listen to Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who's also concerned about the corruption of acting Attorney General Todd Blanche.
As Todd Blanche pursues confirmation as Attorney General, there is a courtroom in Florida that could settle his fate. Remember, Blanche was the maestro behind Trump's creepy slush fund, either to pay off his election disruptors from January 6th or to fund election disruption next November. In any event, that came out of a settlement in that Florida courtroom. And there was enough mischief in that matter that 36 retired judges warned the trial judge that a fraud upon the court may have been committed. The trial judge took it seriously enough to reopen the case and offer the Trump lawyers an opportunity to respond. Well, DOJ didn't bother to answer. The deadline ran, deafening silence. Only Trump's private lawyers filed a very terse pleading. Now the judges, the 36 judges that brought the original challenge on Friday, get to respond, and then the judge will pursue the matter. So watch this space.
It's incredible too. As a former judge, I can speak a little bit about this. For judges to get that involved in this is not normal. Most judges, by temperament, and this was an issue, I think people thought Merrick Garland wasn't aggressive enough. I think most judges have this predisposition to try and be relatively neutral. For 36 judges to go out of their way to push this issue is very significant. Just like there were many judges, former judges, who are part of this complaint against Pam Bondi with the Florida bar. This is not normal behavior. So my point is, for judges to step up after they've retired with their general predisposition to neutrality is really remarkable. And I'm curious to see what assistance that they provide this judge in Florida on this point.
We've all walked past fire alarms that say, in case of fire, break the glass. This is a break glass moment for these judges. They recognize that everything, none of this is normal. None of this is constitutional. All of it needs to be stopped now. And so they have said, you know what? We're not going to allow them to dismiss this case and sweep this under the rug. We're going to go and here are the things that you can do. And they may be limited, but they're saying this is a time when we have to stand up for the rule of law.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Gary. And it's heartening to see that this scheme that was drummed up by Blanche, and I'm sure Mr. Steve Miller, who loves to think he's the smartest guy in the room, and we can pull this over on this judge when the judge rightly determined there really wasn't a case or controversy with adverse parties. The DOJ saw this as a private piggy bank, and let's just use this judge. We need a forum to do this in. And the judge said, wait a minute, you're not going to use me. You're not going to use the court system, which is a separate branch of government, as a part of your scheme. And I fully, as I said, agree with you, Gary. Wait a minute, this is not going away. And I think it's politically, it's a problem. Legally, it's a problem, again, for these judges. Again, when you talk about 36 judges, that's a lot. And again, we're on the same page. They wouldn't do this unless they saw that there was a very serious breach of ethics and the law.
And this so-called settlement agreement, when the suit was pending, the IRS created a 25-page memorandum of law to say, we're going to fight this case that Trump has filed, because we think it's BS. And that got swept away.
Buried.
Okay, buried. The IRS did not sign off on the settlement agreement saying that, that part that's the get out of any audit for the rest of your life provision that Todd Blanche dreamed up for Trump and all of his kids and all of their businesses. IRS didn't sign off on that either. So none of those things are legally binding on the U.S. government if the agency that's charged with enforcing those laws didn't say, yeah, that's fine with us. So who knows where this is going? Blanche says, I'm not going to pursue this slush fund. So the judge and several judges have said, put it in writing. Again, showing that there's no longer this presumption of regularity that you can trust what the Department of Justice says. Now they want to see it in writing before they'll say, okay, we believe you now.
Well, let me highlight that. I do think, by the way, again, Trump does so many crazy things, and he hopes we won't pay attention. That slush fund came out of this suit by Trump against the IRS. Keep in mind, again, out of 40,000 people that had their information disclosed, he was the only one who sought any damages, and he wasn't damaged by that. But you're right, the IRS was going to contest that. And for these government officials, whether it's the IRS or DOJ, or even we talk about this prison official in Texas, to have to bury what they know is right and just shut up, that affects this system when they're being told to do something that's illegal. And then from that, Ed and Gary, came the other lawsuit that was driven opposing the slush fund, and that's the case the main one you mentioned, Gary, where the judge said, I want a declaration from the Attorney General and others, I think include the Department of Treasurer, Secretary of the Treasury, saying that you will not be depleting this trust fund. And by the way, since last Thursday, Blanche has come out and said, "F you, Judge. I'm not going to follow that your court order." He said that after our last show, Ed, and he's saying, "I'm not going to follow a declaration." It's incredible.
Well, it's time for a short break for national and international news now from America's leading architect of alternative facts, Fox Fake News. It's almost a tongue twister, isn't it? Now, when we return for the second hour of The Voice of Reason, we're going to take a peek at historian John Meacham's new book called American Struggle. And you just may not believe how fast the wealth of the world's billionaires is increasing, leaving less for you, of course. I'm Ed Golly, inviting you to stay with me and my co-hosts Kevin Carey and Gary Gibbons here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, where the Voice of Reason will return in just a few minutes with more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
They keep digging through rubble, searching for survivors. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News. In Venezuela, after two earthquakes struck a minute apart, a 7.2 magnitude and then a 7.5.
Right now, we're worried that there are people trapped in rubble. We want to help them get out. Some of those people have relatives that live in the United States.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. has sent rescue crews already, and much more aid is to come. At least 164 people are dead, nearly 1,000 injured.
Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, warning this death toll is expected to climb as emergency crews are racing against the clock to reach devastated areas and continue pulling victims from dozens of collapsed buildings. Now, while Venezuela sits near multiple fault lines, these are among the strongest earthquakes to hit the country in more than a century.
That's Fox's Dana Marie McNichol. Secretary Rubio spoke about the quake after talks on Iran and Bahrain with Gulf leaders.
We're going to give diplomacy every chance to work.
And as nuclear talks continue to prevent Iran from having weapons after a deal to extend the ceasefire, Rubio says it's vital shipping keeps flowing freely in the Strait of Hormuz without Iran's intervention.
You can call it a fee, you can call it a toll, call it whatever you want. If you are charging money to use the straits, we won't support it. We won't tolerate it. We won't allow it.
We got an inflation update this morning showing the biggest annual rate of increase since April 2023, driven up by the Iran conflict, 4.1% in what are called personal consumption expenditures. But oil prices are down a little again today. WTI $70 a barrel. Brent crude is now less than before the Iran fighting. However, gas still almost $1 a gallon higher, upsetting President Trump.
We are not seeing anything at the pump by comparison to what it should be.
He claims oil companies may be gouging us. They deny that. Another Trump executive order trying to impose new restrictions on mail-in voting blocked in court today after another judge put a block on another order to impose citizenship and ID rules. The president keeps pushing Republicans in Congress to pass a law. America's listening to Fox News.
If you want unlimited talk, text, and data on a crazy fast network, Big Wireless will sell it to you right now for as little as $70 a month. Or you can buy it from Pure Talk for half of that. I'm talking about unlimited talk, text, and unlimited data for just $34.99 a month. Stop paying the big guys twice what you need to. Dial pound 250, say my name. That's pound 250 micro to switch to Pure Talk, where the savings are truly unlimited.
Connect to Fox News Audio on the Fox News app. Listen to hear your favorite hosts like Brian Kilmeade, Jimmy Fallon, and Guy Benson standing up for what's right, live and via podcast. Just click listen, then swipe right and hear the latest news updates on your time. And scroll down to hear the latest podcasts from Fox News. And it's even easier to listen in the car with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Get programming alerts and notifications. Fox News Audio is on the Fox News app. The voices America trusts. Download it now.
This is Downtown Dave. How would you like to be able to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business for less than the cost of one 60-second commercial on many Tampa Bay radio stations? Here's the deal. You can have your own 1-hour radio program on the Tan Talk Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations. Your program will be on 2 Tampa Bay radio stations and will cover 4 million people in Florida, plus worldwide on the internet in both audio and video. And you'll have a web link for your business on the the Tan Talk 1340 website. We provide the producer, the state-of-the-art equipment, free production of commercials, and much more. Check it out today. Call Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola O'Brien now, 727-510-7622. Call now and your 1-hour radio program can start tomorrow. Call 510-7622 for Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course, we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
And with me in the Tan Talk studio, my co-hosts, attorney and former circuit judge Kevin Carey, along with attorney Gary Gibbons. And you know, gentlemen, whenever we ask a conservative, tell me something that Trump has done that you like, they inevitably and always come back to the same thing. He sealed the border. Well, I think I found out why the white nationalists are so excited about that. And it's a quick statistic I'm going to pitch, which is that white students now make up less than 50% of all Americans enrolled in public and private schools. From nursery schools through graduate programs. Latinos are today the second largest group of students at 24.5%, after whites at 48.8%. That's just about the percentage of votes that Trump got for the presidency. But to me, the white nationalists are afraid that their culture is being threatened by this intrusion of Latinos and brown people, and they don't care how corrupt Trump is. They don't care how much of a phony he is. They don't care how much money he steals or wastes. That is the sole and exclusive focus of their support for them.
Well, they understood years ago, Ed, that the typical white person was going to be in the minority.
Yeah.
So they're smart. They're the smartest in the room. They like to believe, and they say, well, how do we deal with this problem? What they did was twofold. One was they knew they had to control the judges, which we Democrats have been slow to understand that. And so what the result of that is through the judges and what's happened, for example, with the Supreme Court, the abortion cases and others, they get the judges to make rulings that are contrary to majority of opinion of this country. For example, what happened with the abortion ruling was 70% of this country opposes that. So yes, they're fighting upstream a trend that they can't win, but they're trying to slow it as much as they can, because this country is not going to be, and furthermore will not be, this white world.
But do you agree with me that is probably the strongest issue on which Trump gets support from the white nationalists? Is their fear of the alteration of the culture by an intrusion of minorities?
The great replacement theory.
Yeah.
That's what they keep saying on Fox and all these Tucker Carlson has been a big proponent of that,
And
saying,
isn't he here there?
spreading fear that you're going to be
you're going to lose
a
your white
minority
privilege
and you're going to
yeah.
be punished. And so we're not going to allow that to happen. We're going to get rid of all these people before that happens.
Well, yeah, his whole immigration policy
immigration
was a false premise that these are all these, these black and brown people are coming in here, from Mexico, for example, or Africa, wherever, and raping and killing. It's not true. There's never been to this day a validation of this concept of these immigrants who are causing violence and creating, violent crimes. It's just a false narrative.
Remember the caravans of people that were supposedly coming from Central America.
And the prisons and insane asylums were being emptied.
Yeah,
that never happened.
And they never came because the election happened. And then you never heard of it again.
And that's why they support him, right?
Yeah.
They say he actually did seal the border, and better, he's rounding up the people that aren't supposed to be here, sticking them in the internment camps and deporting them to who cares where.
Well, okay, at a huge cost that this the channel he played to get elected was, and he didn't give a damn about the Constitution, is exactly what you're noting, Ed, is you've got a violation of the constitutional rights, no due process. These people in these internment concentration camps, and the people being deported aren't violent criminals. They're people that have maybe committed a minor crime of shoplifting, or we've talked about are illegally deported because they were here, for asylum reasons. Yeah. So what he's done is turn this Constitution totally upside down for the sole purpose of enriching himself and his buddies.
Yeah. Their argument, of course, is that by being here illegally, that's a crime in itself,
which is completely incorrect.
It's like a traffic ticket.
Yeah.
It's a civil infraction.
Well, to say that, for example, that if you're born in this country, you're not a citizen, even though that's exactly what the Constitution says. The fact that case even got to the U.S. Supreme Court is a joke, because the Constitution expressly says that if you're born here. So the damage he's done to this country in so many ways is just incalculable. It's just horrendous, and it'll take years for this country to come back from this horrible, corrupt president.
John Meacham is one of America's preeminent historians, and he's published a book recently, came out in February of this year. Title is American Struggle, Democracy, Dissent, and the Pursuit of a More Perfect Union. It's an historical anthology featuring key speeches and essays and documents from 1619 up until the present, exploring how historical conflicts shape modern national identity and democratic values. Kevin?
Yeah, John Meacham, who's won the Pulitzer Prize and is a very well-regarded author. I saw this book at the library the other day, and it was very interesting. And it is a lot of quotations of speeches and whatnot. But one of the things that struck me was toward the end, there was Stephen Levitsky and Lucan A. Way. This was in Foreign Affairs in March and April 2025, just when Trump's second presidency was started. It's called The Path to American Authoritarianism, What Comes After Democratic Breakdown. What Meacham wrote was, and I'll try not to read too much, but I think it's important because what they predicted has certainly happened. The Trump presidencies featured notable breaks from American political and constitutional norms. For many of his supporters, such novel grasps for and assertions of power were welcome. For many others, however, the autocratic tendencies and targeted retributions against Trump's rivals and critics marked the beginning of a dark chapter in which the rule of law was being supplanted by the will of a single man and of a particular political movement. And this essay was, again, Levitsky and Way, which you can find in Foreign Affairs magazine, March and April of 2025, or in this book. But Donald Trump's, just a couple things. Donald Trump's first election to the presidency in 2016 triggered an energetic defense of democracy from the American establishment. But his return to office has been met with striking indifference. Many of the politicians, pundits, and media figures and business leaders who viewed Trump as a threat to democracy 8 years ago now treat these problems as something not to really to worry about. But what they talked about is what's called competitive authoritarianism. Authoritarianism does not require the destruction of the constitutional order. What lies ahead is not fascist or single-party dictatorship, but rather competitive authoritarianism. And that's the term I just wanted to focus on. A system in which parties compete in elections, but the incumbent's abuse of power tilts the playing field against the opposition. Most autocracies that have emerged since the end of the Cold War fall into this category, including Alberto Fujimori's Peru, Hugo Chavez's Venezuela, and contemporary El Salvador, Hungary, which we've talked about a lot, India, Tunisia, and Turkey. And just briefly, under competitive authoritarianism, the former architecture of democracy, including multi-party elections, remains intact. Opposition forces are legal and above ground, and they contest seriously for power. Elections are often fiercely contested battles in which incumbents have to sweat it out. And once in a while, incumbents lose, as they did in Malaysia in 2018 and Poland in 2023. But the system is not democratic. Here's the point. Because incumbents rig the game by deploying the machinery of government to attack opponents and to co-opt critics. Competition is real, but unfair. Competitive authoritarianism will transform political life in the United States as Trump's early flurry of dubiously constitutional executive orders made clear. The cost of public opposition will rise considerably. Democratic Party donors may be targeted by the IRS. Businesses that fund civil rights groups may face heightened tax and legal scrutiny or find their ventures stymied by regulators. Critical media outlets will likely confront costly defamation suits, sound familiar, or other legal action, as well as retaliatory policies against their parent companies. Americans will still be able to oppose the government, but opposition will be harder and riskier, leading many elites and citizens to decide that the fight is not worth it. A failure to resist, however, could pave the way for authoritarian entrenchment with grave and enduring consequences for global democracy. So again, I would recommend readers and our listeners, our viewers, to read that. But the point is, there's this facade of democracy and competition when there's not. He penalizes those who oppose, files these crazy defamation suits. We've talked about the law firms. We've talked about media. And when I read that again was written before this whole horror story started, because it was the beginning of his term. But and if you read more and more, I didn't want to just spend the whole hour reading to you guys. But it all's come true. And it also, the other side of it, which I didn't read, but it rewards those who kiss his ass and are committing illegal acts. So it's a two-way street. We're going to penalize those who are trying to stand up to democracy, and we're going to reward those who follow in line in this very authoritarian way. So I know we've used that term many times, I think correctly, about this regime. Anyway, I just thought it would be interesting, and I appreciate the time we have to talk about it.
Well, look at the charges and the claims made against the Southern Poverty Law Center, for example. They are huge on voting rights and trying to protect voting rights. And so you attack them. Now they have to defend themselves in this court case, distracting themselves from being able to fight the good fight against what's going on with voter suppression. And then you see other people that get charged with things, even though they are BS charges, and you still have to spend money, you still have to defend yourself. And at the end of the day, you're going to be vindicated, but it costs, maybe you're bankrupted from it. And so that makes people sit on their hands and not do things. So, and the media, Trump's trying to dispel, what's actually a fact now. We don't even know what facts are because things are coming so fast and furious, and he lies about everything. And so, the cutting of the base of the reflecting pond, that's a lie. It never happened. But how many people in this country now believe that that's the case?
Well, you mentioned, let me comment a minute again. You mentioned the media. Trump brags almost every day of the week about how he got these big settlements from CBS and from ABC. The CBS had to do with, I think, the 60 Minutes, and the ABC had to do with Stephanopoulos' comment about had to be. those are two cases where I think if you talk to any legal expert, and you do have two attorneys at this table, those cases he would have lost those cases. Those were frivolous cases, and frivolous. They weren't just they weren't debatable. He would lose those cases. Plus, he had no damages. But because of some of the dynamics we're talking about in this what's called a competitive authoritarian system, which tries to create the facade of a democracy, these companies, pay these huge amounts of money for other reasons. For example, we've talked about all these issues on our show, wanting to get, for example, approval by the FTC or whatever other agencies to approve these monopolistic joining of corporations. The use of tariff was used as a weapon by Trump. He doesn't care about whether this is any fairness, or whether it's going to create an economic disaster, which it did. But it's again a facade of that we still have a democracy, but the fact that he's paid a penny in these frivolous cases, and then he allows, he brags about he's filing a lawsuit this week about comments made. I forget who the defendant is, but he continues to do this. And Gary, as a lawyer, and I used to represent some larger corporations in the media. The problem with paying money is not just the money; you're encouraging further litigation, and that's why often corporations are willing to pay lawyers a lot of money, because they don't want to encourage further litigation. And that's what's happened here. He is now emboldened. Anything the media says that's negative, although it's truthful, by the way, none of these statements made were false. And when, Gary, you understand how high the standard is in defamation, particularly with a public figure. It's almost impossible to win these cases. And yet they pay this money, and it's wrong. At some level, this should bother not just Democrats, but also these MAGA Republicans.
Well, it's this whole mentality of the business world to go along to get along. They are paying money that shouldn't be paid because they have some other deal that they really want to get approved, and they know that they have to grease the palm of the mob boss in order to get that done. And that's really what we've become. And when you look at the rest of the world and how they are staring at us, saying, you used to be a place that was the shining city on the hill, the one that everybody else around the world looked up to. Yeah, you screwed up from time to time, but we knew that your heart was in the right place. Now they don't believe that our heart's in the right place. Now they think that we're just corrupt.
Wasn't it fascinating to see the vice president of this country stumping for an oligarch when he was over and in Hungary trying to get Orban reelected?
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of message is that to the rest of the world?
Trump on the phone, in this rally, so that he could speak, for him as well.
This is the kind of government that these people respect and endorse. Are you kidding me?
Well, and of course, thankfully that he lost. I mean, the good result came from that. But what these countries are doing, whether it's Europe or Canada, they're moving on. I mean, one good example is with this. Trump still thinks we should be focusing on oil and coal, which, by the way, is enriching Iran, as I said earlier. But what's happening is other countries like China, if you took the time to look what China's doing, are taking full advantage of this. And Europe is moving on. Canada certainly doesn't kiss Trump's ass, to the credit of the Prime Minister of Canada. But when the reality, for example, there is climate change, and there is this need to get away from fossil fuels, which Trump does nothing but obstruct solar power, wind, literally by forcing federal judges to get involved. The world, and you're right, Gary, that the point is we were always a leader, not just because of economics or military might, because of ideals. And right now we've lost that. But these other countries, they're not going to follow our lead. They're going to move on without us. Well, they don't need us necessarily.
John Kerry last night was talking, because he's in London for this conference that has to do with energy, actually. And he said that the UAE, that is an oil-rich nation, is looking at completely changing their whole system. They're going to solar. They're looking to reroute any oil that they sell a different way so it doesn't have to go through the Strait of Hormuz.
Wow.
All these things are saying, we recognize that oil is really politically toxic on top of everything else. It pollutes the air we breathe, and it's causing climate crisis. But beyond that, they understand that the future is harnessing the power of the sun, and maybe some small nuclear plants. They're talking about that as well.
Micro
But
plants,
again,
yeah.
we're not looking at coal and oil as the future, except for the crazy guy in the White House.
One of the other speeches that John Meacham includes in this book, American Struggle, that we started talking about, was a speech by Jimmy Carter in July of 1979. It was third year, and it was the crisis of confidence speech. You may have heard. Of course, Iran came and his presidency came to an end. But the point I want to make is he talked in great detail in that speech about energy and how we need to change from fossil fuels. And think about that. That was 1979. That was 21 and 26. What's that? 47 years ago. And here we are. And we know what happened. Trump, when he sought re-election, he went to these big oil companies and he said, "You need to fund my campaign and I will reward you." And boy, has he ever. It certainly is contrary to science, but it's enriched the big oil. It's enriched his donors, and that's all it's about with Trump, is enriching the people that support him. And the global world understands that that's not science. That we need to get away. Just as I said, Carter was talking about this in 1979. This isn't some new concept. He had solar panels in the White House that Reagan took down.
Unless you
There's
think
a
this is all a
metaphor.
hoax.
Yeah.
The temperatures in the Antarctic Peninsula hit a record 59.7 degrees Fahrenheit earlier this month, which is 3.6 degrees higher than the previous winter high set in 1998. But worse, it's about 36 degrees above the normal temperature for June. And remember, if those big glaciers down there in Antarctica start falling into the ocean, you're going to see some measurable sea level rise. And it takes centuries for glaciers to rebuild. First, you got to get the mean temperature back down so that they can.
I don't know how you do that, Ed. I think it's irreversible.
When you're pumping more carbon in the atmosphere all the time.
And I don't. But once you've got, and certainly the higher temperatures in the Gulf, these hurricanes are much more severe than they ever were before because of the higher temperatures of the water.
Listen to this. Tom Steyer, he is a billionaire out in California.
You ran for governor.
He spent 216 million balloons on his recent failed bid for governor. And then in 2020, he'd spent $342 million when he ran for the presidency. Now, think about that kind of money. And do you think after having spent that, his lifestyle changed one iota? Not a bit. 15 years ago, the world's billionaires collectively had $4.5 trillion, 15 years ago. By 2024, their wealth had more than tripled to $14.2 trillion, and now their combined wealth totals $20 trillion, which is an amount that's equivalent to nearly a fifth of the entire world's total yearly output. This is just amazing. It's a global trend. The growing dominance of a few technology companies leading artificial intelligence development, the shrinking slice of the economic pie that goes to workers, and a deepening inequality that'll be handed down to the next generation. There are roughly 3,000 billionaires in the world. Approximately a third of them, I think about 990 something, live here in the United States. And of course, the world's first trillionaire. Their rising wealth is a 40% increase in just the last 2 years. And that's coincided with significant changes to U.S. tax laws over the last decade that largely benefited the country's richest families and stockholders and led to an increase in their political influence. So contrary to the misconception that cutting tax rates generates more income, in fact, it's just the opposite, because that wealth is hoarded by the rich, who then build it into even more wealth, while the country needs to borrow more to make up for the revenue that it doesn't get, which happened consistently when Reagan did it, when Baby Bush did it, and when Trump did it. It's always the same thing. We've got to go into massive borrowing to make up for the lost revenue, while the wealthy get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier and complain about paying taxes.
Well, we bang this drum, I think, almost on a weekly basis because it needs that. But what it does I think there's no debate about that fact. But the result of that, which I think is also undebatable, Gary and Ed, is it's a destabilizing concept. You've minimizing the middle class. You've got healthcare problems, but you're creating an unstable environment. And so, if I don't know how rich these people need to get, but that's what this administration is about: is making the rich richer and minimizing benefits for the poor.
Well, Trump likes to talk about the success of the stock market, but it's the top 1% of Americans who own half of all the stock. According to data from the Federal Reserve, they're the people that are profiting and benefiting so much and seeing their wealth increase. The top 0.1% of Americans, which is a group of about 135,000 households, own stocks that total $13.7 trillion. Now, if you took one person from each household and parked them in Tampa Stadium, you'd need 2 stadiums to accommodate all those people.
The poor aren't benefited by the stock market going up.
No, because the bottom 90% of Americans only own about $7 trillion, and that's a group of about 115 million households. I crunched the numbers. If you took one member of each of those households and stuck them in a stadium, you'd need over 1,770 stadiums, to 1,700 stadiums to accommodate all those people. And they've got less than half of that top 1/10 of 1%.
Politics is at a very human level. I think we focus primarily on politics and law on this show. But remember, Bill Clinton talked about, "I feel your pain." And I think people believed that he did care. This country, people don't begrudge the fact that you're wealthy. But they do begrudge the fact that you don't give a damn about them. And when you know that about Trump, and he tells you that inflation is a good thing. He tells you that he thinks affordability is a hoax. He doesn't hide these things. He doesn't give a damn about the fact you can't pay the rent or you've lost your medical insurance. He does not care about that. And that's the problem he's got. He doesn't understand and read the room of that this country is hurting right now. And we talked about this housing bill earlier, would have helped a little bit. It wouldn't have solved all the problems, but it would have been a message. And that's what Thune was begging him to help us. And people perceive that this guy doesn't give a damn about the common man who doesn't benefit from the stock market going up.
Of course, yesterday he said, housing, that's not a problem. I know more about housing than anybody. I've built, millions of housing units, and really what you have to do to fix housing is just lower interest rates. Yeah, he's a one-track mind, everything. I know more than anybody. You've never seen anything like it before.
Yeah,
you don't need this bill. All you need is give me low interest rates, which would send inflation through the roof and cause housing to go even further out of reach for anybody.
Because it's the big Wall Street firms that are buying up the housing, right? And so if the interest rates go down, they're going to buy even more houses, which then leaves fewer houses, less inventory for the people that want to buy, because the corporations that buy them make cash offers, and they make a good cash offer and they walk off with the house, while the poor middle class guy is dicking around trying to get a loan together.
Well,
and the house is gone before you can buy
Senator
it.
Warnock had a provision in this bill, which was included that provision. And not only just affects buyers,
exactly.
it also affects renters because it monopolizes the housing market and allows these corporate buyers aren't moving into these homes, they're renting them, and that's increasing the rent. So
they're setting rates with algorithms based upon different rental rates for these properties that they own, depending upon what part of the country they're in. And during COVID,
and they're terrible
I'm
landlords.
president of a title company in Tampa, and we saw lots and lots of purchases by these, BlackRock and all these other hedge funds that came in and saw this as a good place to put their money, and also an opportunity to have control of the rental market going forward, and they have.
Again, there's going to be
I don't know.
a huge
You can put
price
the
to be
genie
paid.
back in the bottle on that stuff.
They tried to portray Bush 1, who, gosh, compared to Trump, I never would have voted for. I didn't vote for any of the Bushes, but I think Bush 1 did have some compassion. But they made him out to be not the common man by they asked him what's the price of milk, which he could not provide. Look at Trump. I mean, nothing about him suggests he has any understanding of what the common person in this country is dealing with. And at a fundamental level, that's a problem. So what's his solution? We're going to have to suppress the vote, cheat. I want to federalize elections, which is completely contrary to the contribution to the Constitution, which says that state by states deal with this. He's now blackmailing states, saying I'm not going to fund mail and other issues if you don't turn over your voter rolls. What is this other than an authoritarian system?
When's the last time you think Trump filled up a car with gas
or a 747 with jet fuel?
Yeah.
He doesn't pay for anything.
No.
He doesn't pay for his housing, his medical care, his food, nothing.
And by the way,
he gets a free ride.
He
on it.
bitches about mail voting. He voted twice by mail. Twice he used this system.
He said at a rally in Pennsylvania that the price of eggs has come down 5-fold since he's been in office. When did you ever pay over $12 for a dozen eggs? Nobody did.
No.
He just throws these stats out. It just pulls them out of thin air as if we're all going to just say, oh, wow, thank goodness we put him in.
Tip O'Neill said that all politics is local. And it is, and it's at the basic level, and it's killing these Republicans who need to get reelected. The bigger problem that I heard this morning, and I agree with guys, is that when they lose, he's not going to quietly go away. Then we're going to have a whole battle that he's going to say it was rigged and cheated, and Democrats, and we'll have litigation. It's going to be a nightmare, even if we win in November.
Well, it's 36 past the hour. We're going to pause for a quick timeout, tell you about some of the other programs here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. When we come back, we're going to take a look at how clueless our vice president is about how wars in the 20th century were settled. That and more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Check out the Randall Jenkins Real Estate Hour every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m., where Randall will help you with things like down payment assistance, real estate tips, how to use AI to enhance your real estate experiences, real stories about real estate, nightmares, and triumphs. Also taking your phone calls and much more. That's the Randall Jenkins Real Estate Hour every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
The New York Times reports that President Trump lost this war. Warned of the risks, he plunged in recklessly, insisting the conflict would end with Iran's unconditional surrender, the removal of its stockpile of near bomb-grade nuclear material, and a halt to uranium enrichment. But the Islamist regime Trump vowed to topple remains in place, and the terms he's negotiated seem worse than the Obama-era Iran deal he tore up in 2018, which successfully limited uranium enrichment by Tehran. Sure, the strait will reopen, but that's merely a reversion to the pre-war status quo. Only a conservative would think this is not a humiliating come-down for Trump and a weakened United States, which would pay strategic costs for years to come. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Well, it's the voice of reason here, 38 minutes past the hour. We wanted to talk about our vice president, okay? He has faced significant backlash for claiming that, and this is a quote, every major conflict in human history, including World War I and World War II, ended with negotiated settlements. He argued this while defending diplomatic compromises, though his historical characterizations sparked widespread condemnation.
If Russia is allowed to keep any of the territory that it illegally seized, what message does that send to China? Does it give China a green light to invade Taiwan? Does it give Russia a green light to invade other European countries, which is what your European allies are concerned about?
Well, first of all, the Ukrainians are going to ultimately make the determination about where you draw the territorial lines in their own country. But Kristen, this is how wars ultimately get settled. If you go back to World War II, if you go back to World War I, if you go back to every major conflict in human history, they all end with some kind of negotiation. We're actually not active parties in the negotiation. We're effectively mediating. We're trying to mediate the Ukrainians and the Russians to come to some agreement. If the Ukrainians are willing to say something on territory that brings the conflict to the close, we're not going to stop them. We're also not going to force them because it's not our country. We're trying to play a constructive role. The president is trying to play a constructive role to bring peace to the region, but he's not going to force these parties to walk through the door. All he can do is open the door and ask them to negotiate in good faith.
None of those major wars in the 20th century, even going back to the American Civil War, Vietnam, our loss in Afghanistan.
Well, it's news to
the
Japan.
European wars, none of them were settled by negotiation.
It's to be news to Japan to tell them that the World War II with Japan was ended by negotiation as opposed to the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I didn't know that was a negotiation.
Just some comments that some people wrote in on that. One guy says, I remember how Japan got all of Southeast Asia and most of the Pacific and how we let Germany keep pretty much all of Europe to get them to surrender. What are you talking about? This administration has more in common with Chamberlain and Molotov than Churchill and Roosevelt. It's a tragedy that the U.S. became such a cowardly and weak country. And finally, one other said the infuriating thing about this is we all know that Vance is an Ivy League student who is clearly intelligent, so I assume he knows his history. The way he can lie through his teeth to the public is astounding. A real couch fondler.
Couch fondler? That's an interesting term.
I don't know what it means. If it's maybe I shouldn't have said that, but somebody else wrote it.
Well, he's obviously very bright. I've said before, I was impressed when I read his book that
Hillbilly.
Yeah, Hillbilly Elegy. But when he talks now, he's almost comical. You almost look at him and he knows he's not telling the truth. He's got no credibility.
He's the creation of Peter Thiel, who bankrolled he found this guy. He said, oh, okay, we can dress him up. He'll be a man of the people because he came from Appalachia, and we'll package him this way and we'll let him get out and talk about how he's going to do all this great stuff. Meanwhile, he's going to be greasing the wheels for everything that the tech bros want to do. And that's what's happened. And Thiel took him in and made him what he is. And so it's really frightening if he becomes the president.
But why doesn't he realize he's being set up by Trump so that if this whole Iran deal falls apart, he's the one that's going to be hung out to dry on it?
He won't be if Trump dies in office. He'll get the job. So
that's true.
I think his health is much worse than they're letting on and giving us any information about. They have a state-of-the-art medical facility inside the White House, and you don't have to go anywhere to get normal physicals. He's been to Walter Reed more times than I've been to the grocery store this year. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, you're not the only one questioning it, because it's a little concerning when our congressional representatives are questioning the health and the mental stability of our president. Let's listen to Representative Ted Lieu, who questions the health of the president.
The president of the United States is not well.
We can see it with our own eyes. He has tremendous difficulty staying awake on the job. Donald Trump has repeatedly fallen asleep at multiple cabinet meetings, at multiple White House events, at a Memorial Day ceremony, and most recently at a very loud and raucous New York Knicks San Antonio Spurs game last night. The White House needs to come clean to the American people. They need to explain why Donald Trump keeps going to the hospital and why they keep giving him cognitive tests. The American people deserve the truth.
Yeah.
I think that it was a fair criticism of with Biden, and the book came out last year, that I think as a Democrat, we have to be credible and say there was, I think, blame to be placed on how Biden's true condition. So, but here's the hypocrisy. I think that's correct in a fair criticism of how they coddled that whole situation. But now when it comes to Trump, oh no, we can't, we're not going to question all this. I mean, the fact that he's even had the number of procedures and examinations done suggests there's a problem there. And he's often incoherent. So at least try and be consistent. I don't have to agree with you, but don't be a hypocrite, which is what is happening here. There's no question that Trump is having significant physical and mental problems right now.
Ed, do we have a file called Prison? That's the one we're looking for. Let's set that up. This is coming back to Todd Blanche again.
Well, Blanche,
it's the former DOJ pardon attorney, Liz Oyer.
Well, it's again incredible with we talked about a few weeks ago how the Department of Justice wants to say, well, you can't, the state bar and the state Supreme Courts can't discipline or disbar if you're a DOJ lawyer. Likewise, the now Blanche has come up with some great idea about we're going to mandate where a federal convict will serve his or her sentence.
Yeah, let's listen to her spell it out for us.
I'm just going to keep coming on here and saying the same thing. Our president is robbing us blind. I'm not talking about taking advantage of his position to get favorable treatment. I'm talking about pump and dump schemes, illegal stock trades, giving government contracts to family members, and what appears to be the selling of pardons. Take the story that was done about Trump's recent financial disclosure forms that showed that our president bought between $1 million and $5 million of Dell stock right before the Pentagon awarded Dell a $9 billion government contract. This is multi-billion-dollar insider trading behavior, and the Trump family is just cashing in. To be clear, Donald Trump's net worth is up 34% since 2024. Melania and Don Jr. have had a 50% increase in their individual net worth. Ivanka is up 88% to $700 million. Jared Kushner is up 39%, with his individual net worth being similar to his wife's at $700 million. Eric Trump has increased his net worth by 71%. Tiffany Trump has had a 60% increase in her wealth. And Barron Trump, who is a student with no job, has somehow made $10 million since his father became president. This family is stealing from us. And the one group who could rein them in, the people with the power to stop these deals from going through, who could hold the administration accountable, are the Republican Congress members who have majorities in both the House and the Senate, but have decided to act as personal doormats for the president and his family instead of representatives for the people. We now know that Donald Trump made more than 3,600 trades in the first 3 months of the year, trades that netted him around $700 million. That is over 40 trades a day. Trump personally purchased around $5 million of NVIDIA stock on February 10th, and then a week later had his Department of Commerce approve their AI chip sale to China, spiking the stock price and making himself a fortune. What about Donald Trump Jr. taking a stake in a tiny North Carolina startup called Vulcan Elements, a company that hadn't even been in business for 2 years, a company that had less than 50 employees. But 3 months after Don Jr. got involved, the Pentagon invested $620 million into the company. And when the deal went through, a deal that would have normally taken months to close but was somehow pushed through in weeks, the stock valuation went from $200 million to $2 billion. The deal was heralded as a complete windfall for investors. So a complete windfall for Donald Trump Jr. The government used taxpayer money to invest in a company so Donald Trump's son could make bank. And the call to do it came directly from the White House. This is the stuff that is happening every day now. These aren't one-offs. It's a pattern. The president's family is using our public funds to increase their personal wealth. We are literally paying for them to rob us blind. And the only people who could stop it are the Republicans looking the other way. Mike Johnson could call for congressional inquiries into questionable investments. They could ban insider trading. They could force the president to divest from his personal companies, something he should have done anyway because of the emoluments clause in the Constitution. Or at the very least, Congress could rein in government spending while the world is on fire. In many ways, thanks to us. They could do all of that, but they won't. They won't because they are benefiting from the president's favor. They aren't being primaried. They're being gerrymandered into permanent power. And of course, they're insider trading themselves. It's the American people who are suffering because of this. The American people who are drowning in debt. The American people who are unable to afford necessities like housing and food, who aren't making enough money to offset inflation. But our representatives don't care. If there has ever been any question, I hope it is answered now. These people do not work for us. They work for the man who has made more money in the last 2 years than he did in the first 78. And honestly, if that doesn't bother you, it really should. Because our president is running a criminal enterprise out of the people's house. And while the Republican majority could stop him anytime they want, they simply don't care enough to do it. And that's a real problem.
I'm sure glad I don't have to argue with her over who's going to take out the garbage, but she really hits it. I mean, all the pearl clutching about Hunter Biden, not a word about all this corruption that she's outlined that is just done on a daily basis.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to, we're here in a minute, the Liz Oyer on the DOJ, but yes, everything she said was very well put.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is that there's the electorate is really pissed off about the status quo in Congress, and you saw two New York congressional candidates who were incumbents lose this week because people are fed up, and this insider trading and the money is being made by people in Congress, and you see their net worth before they go in, and then when they come out, and it's exorbitant. Yeah. People are dumb. They're figuring this stuff out, and I think there's going to be an earthquake of people that are not reelected, and it's going to be on both sides of the aisle.
The guy that was going to drain the swamp has created a swamp, literally in the reflecting pool. Kevin, take the last word, and then I gave our engineer the wrong cut number, so we'll come right back to Liz Oyer. But you want to have a final word on this previous?
I think I just agree with what's been said here. Again, politics is not that complicated. As I said earlier, on a human level, people understand if there's compassion, empathy. People don't, they don't begrudge someone being wealthy, and they don't actually mandate you solve the problem. What they do care about is that you give a damn about the problem, that you even make an attempt. They don't care that if you solve it. They care about that you even make that you acknowledge there's a problem, and B, attempt to solve the problem. It's not that high of a standard, and Trump fails miserably on both of those levels.
So now let's hear Liz Oyer tell us about this revision to the prison sentencing policy and the ramifications that it can have for this country.
Hey, everybody. I stumbled upon a bombshell while I was doing some research on Todd Blanche. I don't think it's been reported anywhere else, so let me break it to you. 6 weeks ago, the Justice Department quietly adopted a new policy that gives the Attorney General the power to send any federal prisoner to any prison in the country. If you are facing a federal prison sentence, Todd Blanche has total discretion to decide where you'll serve your time. This is a huge deal, and it's a huge departure from past practice. Under this rule, Blanche could direct the Bureau of Prisons to put anyone who opposes the Trump administration in a maximum security prison. If you're prosecuted for protesting ICE, for example, or for vandalizing Trump's reflecting pool, you could serve your sentence alongside murderers and rapists. Blanche could decide to put all of Trump's enemies in maximum security prisons. He could put all Democrats in maximum security prisons. There are no limits, no checks, and no review of his decisions. That is very, very scary. Trump would love to be able to just disappear his political opponents, and this is a step in that direction. On the flip side, this policy permits preferential treatment for Trump's allies. If you're MAGA, you might go to a minimum security camp. Or if you've got a couple $1,000,000 to spend, you could buy your way into a halfway house or even home detention. That's exactly what's happening with pardons under Donald Trump. The wealthy and the well-connected are paying for special treatment. There's no reason to think the same thing won't happen with prison placements. For decades, the federal prison system has used a very rigorous policy for deciding where to place people in prison. The decision is based on public safety. It looks at things like the nature of the offense, the criminal history of the defendant, and factors like violence, sex offenses, gang membership, etc. The preference of the Attorney General has absolutely nothing to do with it. There was no announcement of this change, but here it is, hiding in plain sight. It was signed May 6th by William Marshall, the director of the Bureau of Prisons. Marshall was appointed by Trump, and he reports directly to Blanche. This policy was not in place last year when Blanche had Ghislaine Maxwell transferred to a minimum security camp. Her transfer broke about a zillion different rules. But now, Blanche can move her again, maybe even to home detention or a halfway house in the community. The Senate Judiciary Committee needs to ask Blanche for an explanation before they confirm him to be our next Attorney General. Please share this information widely and ask your senators to demand answers from Todd Blanche.
As a circuit judge at a state level, I've sentenced people to prison, and I think people may not understand that judge does not have the discretion to say, "I'm going to send you to to San Quentin," or that is. In the state level, the Bureau of Prisons, and but as Liz Hoyer mentions, it's governed by regulations. Same thing at the federal level. I don't believe a federal district judge also, I think will sentence you, but then often it then is up to the
prison bureau decides
correct.
where she's going to go.
But again, as she emphasized, that's governed by very strict standards. For example, you would not be sending a sex offender to that country club in Bryan, Texas, as what happened with our good friend Maxwell. So this will come up. In August, these Democrats are going to be licking their chops with that document that apparently was buried that Liz Hoyer came upon. I think it's illegal. I don't think they have the ability to sua sponte on its own, make that change. I'm sure Congress very much will have input in that.
But won't he just say, "Well, I didn't sign the order. I have nothing to do with this"? Yeah, the guy, the prison bureau guy did, who answers to Patel. Go talk to him. Just like when Blondie threw Blanche under the bus about the release of the Epstein files, right? Oh, it was all him. He was supposed to do it. Don't come crying to me.
Well, it doesn't look good. It's illegal. It's unprecedented. So he may, as you say, want to throw someone else under the bus. But the point is, it's giving Blanche that sole authority to where these, again, both ways, to penalize your opponents and to reward as they're doing with Maxwell. So it works on both sides. I don't know whether, Gary, you had any thoughts about that.
Well, this week, a federal judge in Texas sentenced 8 protesters who were protesting ICE facilities in Texas. And one of them was an ex-Marine reservist who actually shot at the ICE facility and hit an officer in the neck. And he didn't die, but as a result, he got a 100-year sentence from this judge. And Trump went ahead and signed an executive order last year that declared Antifa, which isn't an organization and doesn't have a headquarters. It's just people that, like my dad and my uncle, fought fascists in World War II. They're now a terrorist organization. And so the judge used this to say that they were all terrorists and they needed to have these outrageous sentences, more so than Denny Terrio, that was the head of the Proud Boys, that was actually convicted of a seditious attempt to overthrow the government, only got 22 years. Okay, this guy gets 100 years for protesting. Mm-hmm. And again, it's what we talked about earlier. If you're afraid that you might get sentenced for going out and holding a sign, outside, and somebody else does something bad, and now you end up spending 60 years in prison, and Todd Blanche can send you to a maximum security prison if he wants to. No, I think I'll stay home and watch the soccer game. That's what's going on here, and we've always looked at protest in this country as a human right, that we ought to be able to speak out against our government if they're doing something wrong, and now they're weaponizing that.
Well, it's oppression in capital letters, isn't it? And it shows how desperate this administration is to retain power. It's not just that Trump is drunk with power, but that first of all, it's the only time he's ever been able to make any money. And second of all, what's he going to do if he steps down? That he's then subject to being prosecuted himself in the state crimes that he's committed. So
it's not just him that's in for a power grab. It's Blanche and Stephen Miller and Patel and all J.D. Vance.
The complicity of others who knew what they're doing was wrong and illegal. That's part of the story.
Yes. Our quote for this week is from H.L. Mencken, and he said, "For centuries, theologians have been explaining the unknowable in the terms of the not worth knowing." Anyway, he said it. That's all for this week. Join us again next Thursday morning, 9 o'clock, for another edition of The Voice of Reason. My co-hosts today were Kevin Carey and Gary Gibbons. Now, I'm Ed Golly reminding you, the statement seems a little too implausible to be true. Don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.